Today we are going to discuss Introduction to Key Concepts in Language Learning. Acquisition versus learning. They belong to psycholinguistics. Psycholinguistics is a branch of linguistics which deals with the interrelationship of psychological and linguistic behavior. So let's discuss acquisition first. Acquisition is also considered as mentalist approach, which believes that acquisition is a process carried out in the first years of childhood and leads to unconscious knowledge of one's native language, which is practically indelible. So it's a process, it's a natural process which takes place in the early years of a childhood. And it is basically an unconscious learning process or unconscious process of acquiring knowledge. And it is specific to the acquisition of first or native language. Whatever is acquired at that time is permanent, can't be deleted. Acquisition process implies some type of subconscious, effortless assimilation of linguistic knowledge. Since it is natural, since this is a process which is subconscious, therefore it is effortless. Effortless absorption of knowledge or input, linguistic input, which is around the child during those initial years of childhood. More often, it applied to the child's mastery of a first or native language. Since it takes place during the initial childhood period, therefore it is related and concerned with the first language, the native language of a child. Acquisition has nothing to do with intelligence. That is, children of different degrees of intelligence all go through the same process of acquiring their native language. So the process is similar. At that level, at this moment, intellectual ability has nothing to do with the acquisition of first language. Now we will discuss the key features of language acquisition, which is the mentalist approach. The first important feature of this approach is the presence of language acquisition device as an inherited ability. Chomsky believes that every child has language acquisition device, LAD, which encodes the major principles of language and its grammatical structure into child's brain. Then later on, children only to learn new vocabulary, apply it to the syntactic structures from the LAD to form new sentences. Second feature says, children appear to be hardwired to acquire the grammar. Chomsky believes that there is a presence of nouns, verbs, consonants, vowels in all languages, and therefore children are hardwired to acquire any language. That system is present in the brain of the child, and therefore the children follow a similar pattern of acquiring a knowledge. It lacks evidence of grammatical errors in children. Chomsky believes that in the production of the knowledge or language, there is no evidence of grammatical errors in children. In fact, a child would notice if an ungrammatical sentence is uttered. It generates awareness of what is grammatical or ungrammatical. Chomsky gives the example, and he says that, for example, consider a sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. He says that although it is a sentence, as a sentence it is correct, but in terms of conveying a message, it does not convey an accurate message. Therefore, it shows that sentences can be grammatical without having meaning, and that we can tell the difference between grammatical and an ungrammatical sentence without ever having heard the sentence before, or we can produce and understand number of or infinite number of new sentences that maybe we have never said or heard before. Now we'll see learning as opposing to acquisition. Learning is behaviorist approach, and it's a process which is basically mechanical, as it leads to a process of habit formation, which means that learning is a process of mechanically developing habit, doing something, getting a response, and then based on that response, one develops a certain behavior. So learning is considered as something to do with the development of a behavior. So acquisition is different in a sense that it was considered as innate, whereas learning is socially developed in the form of some kind of habit. It implies that language is a conditioned behavior and hence requires drills, imitation, and repetition. Language is a conditioned behavior, that it is developed under some specific conditions. Conditions are determined by drills, imitation, and repetition. Drills activities are given in the form of drills. Imitation is conducted when one way of repeating one thing after another, imitating, and then repeating. So drills, imitation, and repetition reinforce certain behavior. Based on that, language learning takes place. Learning, as opposed to acquisition, tends to involve both explicit and implicit psychological process. Let's see what we mean by explicit and implicit psychological process. Explicit learning. It's conscious awareness of a learner's modifying of his or her knowledge base. Explicit is categorical. Very specific guidelines or instructions for learning are given to learner. And a learner consciously become aware of making modification in the existing knowledge base. Implicit learning deals with the change in the learner's knowledge base, but outside his/her conscious introspection. Implicit is not categorical. They are meant to be understood indirectly through activities, through experiences around, and in this manner, the learner is not consciously aware of it. Key features of learning, which is behaviorist approach, include that learning is entirely a product of experiences. So through experiences, one develops learning under controlled conditions. There are variations in learning, which is because of difference in learning experience, past experiences, difference aptitude, motivation, memory, and age. And definitely, it is based on practice. Imitation, repetition, reinforcement, and intention have significant role in language learning. Now you see the comparative analysis of behaviorist approach and mentalist, and the key characteristics are that it is behaviorist approach is stimulus response process, whereas mentalist approach is innateness and inborn process of language. To conclude, acquisition thus implies the involvement of innate species-specific linguistic knowledge, whereas learning is stimulus-response process.